here at 97.3 ABC Illawarra. Nick Rheinberger with you. Nice to have your company this morning. Now, I don't know what you think about Julian Assange. He certainly is a polarising person, but it's been interesting watching the various groups of people that support him or decry him, etc. As it happens, I was doing a job in Bankstown over the weekend, and I noticed a speak out. This was not a protest so much as an opportunity for people to talk about the case. And I was really curious about it and who was doing it and who they were chatting to. So I want to introduce you to Max Boddy, who was one of the people at the speak out, and why he's so passionate about the case for freeing Julian Assange.
We're out here today holding a speak out, fighting for our meeting tomorrow in defence of Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning.
What's your central argument in the defence of Julian Assange?
Well, Julian Assange, as with Manning, has committed no crime. Julian Assange exercised his right as a journalist to publish numerous documents that prove the war crimes of the United States. He is under attack because, according to Washington, he committed the heinous crime of telling the truth, of revealing the horrors that they conducted internationally. Above all, I think the sharpest example is in Afghanistan and Iraq. But it's not just the United States, but other governments all over the world who've also been revealed in various political machinations, which has, shown corruption, etc. So he is being made an example of. If Assange can be persecuted under these numerous Espionage Act charges, which carry a maximum sentence of 175 years, under the vague terms of publishing things that weren't within the parameters of national defence of the United States, anybody can be charged for publishing on Facebook or Twitter anything that has been, revealed by Assange.
How significant is the recent dropping of the charges in Sweden?
It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the entire the charges, well, they didn't even amount to charges. There were allegations that couldn't be moved up to charges at that stage. I mean, the dropping of the sexual assault allegations against Assange, which never amounted to charges, just proves that this entire campaign was designed to discredit Assange, to isolate him, and in order to, in fact, get him imprisoned in the first place in the UK, which has now led to extradition orders which will send him to the United States. In other words, there's no real legal grounds to stand on. Further to that,
but reading some of your brochure here, I mean, you really say that the Swedes are under the boot of the US, basically, that they've brought these charges and they've continued to investigate them for the last 9 years because they're part of the conspiracy. Do you really put that on the Swedes, or do you think they were just following their own process?
I think the Swedish government, well, when you look at the way that the allegations were continually reopened, every time that they were shut, which I think in the course of about 3 times over the entire period that they were, they were brought before Assange and the world, they were continually dropped for not enough evidence. In fact, Assange, even in 2010, waited an extra, I think it was 2 weeks before he went to the UK in order to answer for these so-called allegations. Now, the police gave him the go-ahead, we've got enough information, you can go. Then reopen the case as a way to slander Assange, on an international basis.
Okay,
so the Swedish government...
Or is it more about the fact that this came about in an era when the Me Too movement was gathering steam and the Swedes, being a very liberal, in the US sense of the word, country, wanted to cover this off, and they went through every available avenue? Do you think it was just an unfortunate coincidence?
Well, in many ways it was the precursor to the Me Too movement. Yeah. I mean, Assange was made an example of. The various processes were in place prior to these allegations, that is, of the promotion of identity politics internationally, but it wasn't just that Assange was some victim of what it later is now the Me Too movement. That the Swedish government worked hand in glove with the United States to persecute Assange in order to discredit him internationally. I mean, it's really an open conspiracy what's being done. The Australian government didn't lift a hand at all. In fact, Julia Gillard labelled WikiLeaks a criminal organisation in 2011, I believe, while he was after he'd been imprisoned in the UK. The UK kept him in prison there and then put pressure to try and get him taken out of the Ecuadorian embassy. The Ecuadorian government eventually acquiesced to the pressures of the United States government to allow the UK government to arrest him and place him in what is dubbed UK's Guantanamo Bay. So it is a open conspiracy across the board. In other words, all these governments are aligned on the question of the attacks on fundamental democratic rights and freedom of speech. And one last point just to vindicate this, I think the fact that after these espionage charges were brought against Assange in countries around the world, but in particular this country, the Anika Smethurst's house was raided, as was then the ABC by the Australian Federal Police, just proves that this was a signal to governments around the world that journalists can be attacked, freedom of speech can be suppressed, and if Assange is held accountable to these charges, it will mean a very right-wing thrust to authoritarian forms of rule internationally.
Just finally, a lot of the Assange case does come down to the fact that he's not defined as a journalist by the Americans. And in fact, he's not an American, therefore he's not protected by the First Amendment, for instance. Where do you think this leaves him facing some kind of court in the US?
Well, the truth of the matter is that Assange is a journalist. The allegations that the calls that he's not a journalist is again, complete fabrication in order to throw him to the walls of the United States. I mean, he published leaked documents that revealed crimes of the United States. I mean, that's the highest role of journalism, is to reveal the criminal activities of governments around the world and hold them accountable. That is what he did. So the conception that Assange is not a journalist, I think, is being utilised to isolate him, has been used by various news organisations to abandon him. Our call is for journalists around the world to take up the defence of Assange, because every attack on an Assange is in fact not attack on journalists everywhere. And I think the ABC raids prove that.
It's Max Boddy, one of the people organising the Speak Out in defence of Julian Assange at Bankstown over the weekend. Now, Nell is from the Illawarra and was listening to that interview I did with one of the hosts of the Speak Out for Julian Assange. Hello, Nell.
Hi, how are you?
Good. What's on your mind?
Okay, so firstly, thank you very much for raising some awareness about the Julian Assange case, because it's very important, and if people knew the details of what was actually happening, they would be outraged. And as Australians, he's one of us. Yes. I want to clarify 2 points that you made as you were speaking to the people at the Bankstown meeting.
Yep.
So the first one is that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks actually won Australia's most prestigious journalism award, the Walkley Award, for the very same material that forms the basis of the indictment. So that's a very important point that people need to remember when they're trying to ascertain the label of a journalist. Because the awards that WikiLeaks has won have been extensive, and they've actually won 6 awards since Julian's arrest. So those awards keep coming and coming and coming. And another award was the Sydney Peace Prize Award, which has only ever been awarded to very few people. Mm-hmm. Now, the second point is a very important one, and it's in relation to Sweden. I'm sorry, I'm really nervous because I'm not used to speaking on the radio. So forgive my shakiness.
It's all right now. You're just speaking to me. Just think of it as just me.
I've been involved in the networks for many, many years, and I followed the case.
Which networks do you mean now?
Well, networks like People for Assange, the socialist networks, the SEP groups,
right.
The New South Wales groups. I'm involved online in a lot of networks across the board. So it's something that I've felt passionate about for a long time, and I've done some writing on it in the past as well. My point is, on the 12th of September 2019, the UN-mandated Special Rapporteur on Torture, Professor of International Law Nils Melzer, released a second report into Sweden's handling of the case. Now, that report includes 50 points of violations of Swedish law in the handling of it, and two of them are crucial that people are aware of. The first one is the disregard for exculpatory evidence, and the second one is proactive manipulation of evidence. So the case was originally opened and closed. It's been reopened 3 times.
Yes, yeah. Max did mention that, yeah.
And it was closed with, and I'm quoting her, and this has come out of Nils' report, I do not think there is reason to suspect that he has committed rape, and conduct alleged by SW disclosed no crime at all. Now, after that original closing of that case, a second prosecutor reopened it and altered the statements, which were unsigned, and fabricated the details within those statements. Now, this is documented. This is not theory. This is not my opinion. And it is in Nils Melzer's report for anybody out there who wants to go and seek the information. And it's been a farce ever since. So everything, every media report, every discussion, every persecution of Julian Assange has been based on points that just didn't happen to begin with.
All right. Nell, thank you very much for having a chat to us today. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
So I hope people will get behind Julian, the fight for him. This is our fight. He's one of us. We are all Julian Assange.
All right.
Please remember that this precedent is permanent. It cannot be reversed. It's a changing of the laws. So once those laws are changed, any journalist, any human being anywhere in the world can be extradited for talking about, for sharing information, for writing about crimes, that those guilty of the crimes were never, ever prosecuted and faced justice.
All right, Nell, I do have to let you go. I've got another guest waiting, but thanks for your call.
Okay, look, thank you.
See you later.
Bye.
Nell from the ILLAWARRA. You can see this is one of those subjects that people feel very strongly about.